Well, good evening, everybody. And we've got another great program for you tonight. Uh, Dr. Lynne Nelson is here to talk about bats. She's stated that it's not part of her normal job, just a interest, but I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun because if you check on the website, her research and expertise is very clear. So a little bit about Lynne herself. She's a professor, assistant dean, lead cardiologist for the WSU College of Veterinary Medicine. So she teaches, does research, and consults on a worldwide basis with some very interesting programs, and maybe we'll hear a little bit about that tonight. But anyway, again, she's going to talk about bats, and it should be a lot of fun. So if you would help me to welcome our speaker, Dr. Lynne Nelson.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Can you guys hear me okay? We tested the sound.
Yes.
Okay, good. So the room's good. Great. Well, I appreciate the invitation to speak to the Audubon in Spokane. I'm a local Blues Audubon member, so I feel like you're my tribe. So this is kind of fun. And as Jerry introduced, I am not a bat expert. I was selected to speak for you this evening based on a newspaper article where a reporter interviewed me about my interest in bats. And so I'm going to give you my perspective on bats and why I think they're great, and a little bit about bat research that I know that is happening here locally as well as across the globe. So I'll give you just a little bit of introduction about myself. I am originally from Alabama, so hence I recognize that Atlanta phone number when Jenny was calling me. So I'm originally from the South, and I have degrees in wildlife biology and my veterinary degree from Auburn University. And I did practice veterinary medicine for a while and then went to Iowa State University and got certifications in internal medicine and cardiology. And I've been a practicing cardiologist here at WSU for 25 years. So I work with the hospital, the veterinary teaching hospital, and cardiology and pulmonary disease and domestic species. But my research has been focused on cardiology and cardiac conditions in wildlife. And I've done many years of research in hibernating bears, hibernating brown bears, and my current research is in captive or managed animals in captive care, bears, and then chimpanzees, which we know have heart disease as well, just like people. So my wildlife interest carries through my birding and my batting, as you'll hear. So I'm going to just give you a little overview about bats. Many of you may know that we have a lot of bats. We have 1,400 species worldwide. They're very diverse. They are mammals. They are the only mammal that is capable of true flight. And they're of the order Chiroptera. So Chiroptera means hand wing. So there is a wing on the hand. And again, they're a very diverse group of bats. Their closest, who knows the closest relative actually of a bat? I don't know if somebody maybe in the audience can yell it out, and somebody with a microphone can maybe tell me. But does anybody know what bats are related to?
No clue.
No, okay. Well, you might be surprised. Their closest relatives are whales and pumas, mountain lions. So they have evolved from a very ancient ancestor that gave rise to whales, cows, and and the big cats, some of the big cats. So they are not related to foxes, as some people have said, and they're not rodents. They are mammals. And they are, again, very diverse. The world's smallest bat is this bumblebee bat here. So on the top, on this guy's finger, these little guys are 1 to 3 inches in length, very tiny creature. And then when these guys are found in Thailand and Myanmar, not of course here in Washington. And these guys, I think, are just cute. When people tell me, oh, bats are creepy and they're ugly, I look at this picture and I show them this picture and I say, people, these things are cute. They're really quite very personnel. It looks like a little, almost like a little chihuahua, like a little dog. So I think they're really quite attractive looking. And the largest bat is the giant golden crown flying fox, and these are endemic to the Philippines. And as you can see, this bat is a very large bat. It's a frutivore, so it's a fruit bat, eats fruit, lives in very large colonies in the Philippines. And so you can get an up close picture of this guy. I think this guy's also quite cute. It does look like a fox, looks like a flying fox. Wow. In our location, we have 15 species of bats. They're called vesper bats. So there are the small bats that are insect eating, and they have simple noses, meaning they don't have ornate protrusions or appendages on their noses or ears or face. They're fairly simple noses, long tails. And the most common species that I tend to record here in Eastern Washington are these, the big brown, little brown, long-legged myotis, and the silver-haired bat. So we have a very bit of species. I have seen a pallid bat here. They're generally more central Washington, but I had one a few years ago flutter in front of my face long enough for me to be able to get a pretty good identification. And we'll talk about identifying bats in Washington here in just a bit. So we have these in our state. And bats, the physiology of bats is very unique, and it is carried across the multiple different species of bats. They are unique in that they fly, they're mammals. They are seasonal animals, so they hibernate like ground squirrels, bears, and other creatures do, so they're seasonal. They breed in autumn, but they do not implant their pregnancy until later in the spring or later in the winter and give birth in the spring. So even though they may breed, if the female bat does not have the fat stores she needs, she may not implant that pregnancy. So the embryo then would disintegrate. But once the embryo is implanted, they have about a 6 or 10 week gestation and generally give birth to 1 pup. So they're fairly slow in their reproduction. They give birth to 1 pup if they are successful in their pregnancy. Bats generally use a maternal roost, so they either use trees or a large cave, and multiple bats then will use this location to give birth and provide a nursery. So the nursery functions as a place to keep all the pups warm as moms go out to feed. And then once the pups are old enough and can hang on, then you can see they can hang on to mom and fly with her, or they don't fly, they hang on while mom flies to do the feeding and then roost back in the cave or the tree at night. So bats are true hibernators. Again, they can undergo torpor, which is more related to slowing a metabolic condition or metabolic rate over a day or overnight or over several days, where hibernation is a longer period, weeks or months. And these guys hibernate for generally months. They are long-lived, so they can live 20 to 40 years, depending upon the species. For their size, that's a fairly long-lived mammal. Their roles in our ecologic systems are primarily insectivores. They are pest control and they're pollinators. So bats generally are eating bugs, insects, or they're pollinating plants or eating fruit and dispersal of seeds. So most of the bats here that we have in the US are insectivores, and they are important for our agricultural systems in reducing crop damage and limiting the use or need to use pesticides in our agricultural crops. So the estimation is about $23 billion a year that is saved, US farmers save by having bats do the pest control. So that's quite a bit of savings. Bats can eat up to half their body weight in insects per night, and pregnant or nursing females can eat up to 100% of their body weight in insects per night. And that's pretty amazing pest control. So we want to have them around. They're pollinators if they're not insectivores and they're eating fruit or dispersing seeds. And so they're pollinators, and they play a vital role in many of our agricultural products, such as agave, balsam wood, carob, and many different kinds of fruit, mostly in the Southwest, Southwest Mexico. We see a lot more bat pollinators. And this is on the lower left here, Mexican long-nosed bat that is been captured for banding and recording. And this bat is not yellow. This bat is brown, like the bat here. And this is all pollen from pollinating an agave plant. So this guy is coated in pollen. Bats have a lot of unique niches. The Mexican and lesser long-nosed bats are the classic tequila bats that you hear about. So they're feed much like a hummingbird would feed, with a long tongue, which they send down into the flower and take and slurp up the nectar just like a hummingbird might. And then they are coated with pollen and then disperse this to the next flower and next agave plant. So they are the agave's key pollinators. And you will hear about and see in the Southwest, particularly, big campaigns to plant more agave, to rewild your backyard and plant more agave, or restore agave plants in places where they might have been eliminated in parks or other natural landscapes, to renaturalize the landscape for the bats. So if you like your margaritas, then bats are your thing. They're responsible for your margarita. Bats can also have very unique different types of niches, especially in other parts of the country. And this bat from South Mexico and into Brazil, the fringe-lip bat, is a unique creature in the fact that he preys exclusively on tangara frogs. So this guy listens for the calls of frogs, so the sounds of male frogs in particular, and the echolocation then can guide him into the location of those frogs as they're calling. And their abilities, echolocation abilities, can even detect the water ripples of the frog after the frog is ducked down. And the adaptation here is this ornate nose, and then these lips here, the fringe lips, which kind of looks like a gripper pad that you might use to get something out of the oven with, but it's like a sticky pad with little suction cups that helps him hold on to that wet, kind of slippery frog as he swoops in to grab the frog. He's kind of a gripper cup on his mouth to grab the frog. So very interesting and unique adaptations to eating frogs. Oops. So you probably know, as we know about all of our other wildlife species that we're concerned about and our bird species that we're concerned about, they have disease and they have threats to their populations. And just like our birds, many wildlife populations, habitat destruction, elimination of their feeding zones, their maternity roosts, places where they might hibernate, habitat destruction is key for bats as well. Climate change, accelerated changes in abrupt changes in weather, also can affect bats. Unprecedented freezes or heat waves and things that occur abruptly and as a unique events are also affecting bats as well. Wind energy, also a key feature for bats. We're concerned about wind energy from the standpoint of the speed of the blades of the wind turbines. There's been many studies to look at how we mitigate wind and bird and bat mortality with wind energy. And one solution that, or may not be a solution, but a patch, a little bit of a palliation may be the wind turbine speed. So many of the mortalities, about half of the mortalities occur when the wind turbines come on. And if the wind turbines come on with a slower speed and gradually ramp up to a rapid speed, then mortality can be reduced by a half for bats. So things that we can do to try to mitigate energy production is always beneficial for birds and bats. And then bats, because they're bats, suffer from just general persecution and bad mythology that's been passed down a really long time. So the Dracula, the vampire bat myths, the bats like to nest in your hair, you know, there's all of those things that we kind of learned as a kid still are pretty pervasive today. And people will oftentimes find a colony of bats and maybe eliminate that colony of bats based on fear. So trying to educate people, I think, is an important piece of what we can do. Is bats are good for the environment. They're good for agricultural economies as well. White nose syndrome is probably one of their biggest and most deadly diseases currently. White nose syndrome is a fungal disease that was first discovered in New York in a single cave in 2006. In that particular cave, it wiped out 99% of the bat population. It was a massive die-off. And then slowly across the country and across time, it has spread. It's spread across the east, and then down the East Coast, and it's coming across the country. And it's created one of the more massive population declines in the wildlife population in this past century. I think we'll probably start hearing more about bird flu is coming up to maybe be a contender for this designation, but a big deal for bats, and particularly bats when they're hibernating. The fungus grows once the bat's body temperature drops during hibernation. It allows the fungus, which is in their respiratory system, to grow. And the fungus here, you can see on their little noses, and it starts to grow around their nares, and it's down into their respiratory system, and it causes them to wake up. It causes them to burn a lot of extra energy, increases their metabolism, and then they essentially starve when they consume all their winter fat stores. So the little brown bat, the Yuma myotis, western long-eared bat, and the fringe myotis are the bat populations that have been hit the hardest with white nose syndrome. Little brown bat is what we have here. This map here shows you where we have white nose syndrome in Washington. So it was discovered a few years ago. We have the red dots are more cases, and the yellow are fewer cases, and we have orange dots. So you can see how we identified a hot spot here, and it slowly seems to be creeping out across the state. So we're probably going to see it in other places fairly soon. And this is an interesting article that just was published in Science, and certainly caught my attention as a bat advocate, because I think scientists have been for a long time theorizing that declines in biodiversity and continued habitat degradation and ecosystem malfunction, so to speak, is going to carry over eventually into negative impacts on human well-being. But quantitating and qualifying those impacts have been really difficult. And I
Wow.
thought this study was quite simple, but quite elegant in the fact that this scientist used white nose syndrome, so used the areas of known bat die-offs from white nose syndrome, and this is across the years here. So white nose syndrome epicenter was here, and then it spread, and then it started going across the country. So these areas of yellow and green are known areas of bat die-offs from white nose syndrome. And the researcher was able to correlate the increased insecticide use in these areas by 31%. So the counties that had bat die-offs, the farmers used 31% more pesticides than these gray counties, which are the control counties that didn't have white nose syndrome or bat die-offs. And then in these counties that had the white nose syndrome and the bat die-offs, human infant mortalities increased in these counties along the same time, about 8%. So the ecosystem malfunction is the loss of our natural pesticides. So the expansion of the white nose syndrome, our bats, which are our biologic pest control, and then increasing insecticide use. And so they were able to clearly draw a good line from one thing to another. And then the expansion of the white nose, and then connecting it to our the infant death rates in those particular counties. And it's not too uncommon in all mammal populations for infants or small creatures, small young creatures, to be more susceptible to the effects of environmental toxins. So I thought that was really a bit eye-opening to demonstrate the impacts of what we underestimate as an ecologic function of bats, what that can do when we don't have it. We don't have bats in our presence. And then for a long time, we've always heard, well, bats have these great immune systems because they're really long-lived. Bats have very low levels of other kinds of infections. They are rarely ever affected with any kind of a cancer, and they've been resistant to viruses, many different types of viruses they can show resistance to, even though they may be infected. And why is this? So why is this, and why now are bats starting to show increased mortalities to something like a fungal disease or a fungal infection? And then, of course, the latest COVID pandemic, so the COVID-19 pandemic, then brought to light the questions of spillover of viruses from animals to people. So how and why does that happen? So the thought of having COVID originate in a meat market from a bat in China and then spill over into people and then causes global pandemic. How does that happen? So since 2020, there's been an international group called the Viral Emergence Research Initiative, and that's multiple groups across the globe who are studying exactly that. How does this happen, and how do we predict and prevent spillover of viruses from bats or other animals into people? And this is one of our researchers in the School of Global Health at the Vet College who works on bats in Kenya, trying to answer this question. And this publication came out of this global group, which again highlights where we are today with our current issues with climate and density and biodiversity degradation. And this was published in Nature in 2022 from this international group. And they modeled what they suspect is going to happen based on what we're undergoing now. So what is happening with our climate, what is happening with population density, and what is happening in the environment currently with our increasing wildfires and increasing catastrophic events in the climate. And this is one of the summary maps, which is a prediction of what could happen in 2070. So the coding here across the globe in the square, this is the population density here, and then the projected incidence of viral sharing going across the bottom of the square here. So as we increase in population, the incidence of viral sharing goes up. So the highest incidence of viral sharing or the potential for virus to spill over into the human population is this purple color. And when we look at that across the map, then the purple color correlates to these high human population centers across the globe, and they happen to be some of the more environmentally degraded habitats for wild animals. So this projection of where spillover events could occur is, again, something I think we all suspected could be on the horizon, but they do a nice job of showing how and when that might actually happen. So what about bats in our country, or our state of bats in our neck of the woods? So in North America, bats are not faring it very well because of white nose and because of habitat changes. So 53% of bat species in North America are considered at risk. There are 90%, the 90% decrease in the populations of bats over the last 15 years. And I feel like I've seen that in my own backyard. I do feel like for the last about 15 years or so, I don't see the bats that I used to see, and I live along a river. So seeing bats along the waterways and some of the agricultural areas, I just feel like I don't see as I once did. So bats aren't faring as well, and I think that's something that we should pay attention to in the bat species and other species, as well as our own. But that is all seemingly quite dire, and let's talk about something more fun. So more fun is what we can do on our own. What can we do in our local environment? What can we do on our own home turf to make a room for bats and make a home for bats? And many of you, if you're birders, you're probably doing a lot of these things already. Planting native plants, native trees, flowering plants, pollinating plants, things that attract pollinators, things that attract birds and butterflies, also attract bats because they're going to be attracted to the insects. So if you're doing that, you're doing a good job for helping to attract bats. Tearing down old or dead trees is a potential mistake for bats because they use those just like a cavity nesting bird will use that for a roost or a nest. Bats can use those too, and dead trees, snags are preferred places for bats to roost. So if you have the ability to leave a tree standing, please do. It's good for bats. It's good for cavity nesting birds. Organic, of course, keeping things organic. You don't want pesticides if you're trying to attract butterflies and insects and pollinators and things like that. And then cats can prey on birds as well as bats. They can prey on bats. Bats will they feed up high in the air, and that's when we see them most, but they very commonly feed along the ground where there may be bugs and insects that are swarming or moving around lower plants. So cats can be predators as well on bats. And then installing a bat house is also quite fun because you have then the ability to see them come and go and see how many bats you have in your region and what types of bats they may be. And you can either purchase or build yourself. There are nice plans online, these bat houses. So bat houses here that attract bats. Generally, you place them on the south and east facing slopes of buildings or trees, tall trees. And then the bats are attracted in here, and you can see them all jammed in here as a roost, or even hibernating in bat houses. Some bats will do that in this part of the country. So it can be a fun way to attract bats and be able to see them clearly in your location. The other thing you can do to monitor or view bats, you probably already have iPhone or cell phone apps for birds. Well, there are cell phone apps for bats. And you can purchase this little device here that plugs into your phone. And this is called an echo meter. It's made by Wildlife Acoustics. They're about $200. And the application that you download is free. And this little device then hears the bat echolocation sounds as they're flying over or around you. It hears the sounds, and then it displays them across the screen of your phone. And then it also transfers the audio into a sound that you can actually hear. So you hear, which it seems like a chirping, like a fast repetition of a bird chirping type of sound. And then the spectrogram will identify the bat based on these echolocation sounds, just like the spectrogram works on Merlin. It works much the same way. So the application then can identify the bat, and when it gives you this signal here, it's identified the bat. And when you click on it, it tells you which bat then you have heard. And if it is unclear, the signal is unclear, it'll give you a first choice and then a second choice. And you can refine your recording and nail it down. And then you can also save the recordings, import the recordings, email the recordings, and all these different things. And once you've identified your bat, when you click on the little information icon here, it then shows you the picture of the bat that you've just heard. So it identifies it, shows you a picture. And then if you're online somewhere, you can Wikipedia out and get more information about that particular bat. So this is a pretty fun application to use. And yep, it's really fun at summer patio parties to entertain all your friends with. Do you want to hear a bat? And here's what it sounds like, and this is what they look like. And I think it then helps make the bats a normal part of our environment when we don't think about them so much. And just like bird field guides, there's lots of bat field guides too. These are some of my favorites here. The bats of our Rocky Mountain West. So these are bats of our area. This bat encyclopedia here is amazing. It is all 1,400 plus species, and it is gorgeous photography, beautifully illustrated with the biology and the specific features of the different bats. And then this is a really nice read too for anyone interested in understanding a little bit about a bat biologist and what they do. And this is basically a memoir from Merlin Tuttle, who is one of the premier early bat biologists and founded Bat Conservation International. And this is essentially his memoir and how he got into bats and why he became so enamored with bats and his research over many years. It's quite a fascinating read, and it's kind of fun. He's a good writer, and he's entertaining, and he has some nice daring cave adventures. Other things you can do if you become really interested in bats, just like birding destinations, there are bat destinations. You can travel to do bat watching, and this map here on the lower left is off the Bats Conservation International site, and you can go on this site and click on these different locations, and these are kind of the big time bat viewing places. There are numerous places across the country, but these are some of the most well known, and you can get information on how to get there and what it's like and what to expect. And the picture here on the top is a famous bat viewing site in Austin, Texas. It's the Congress Bridge in Austin. And 1.5 million bats every night in the summer emerge from under this bridge. So people congregate here on the bridge, out in other parts of the street. There's a river here, so in boats on the water, to watch bats emerge in the evening, because it's quite an event to watch that many bats come out from under a bridge. And if you go on the Austin, Texas Chamber of Commerce site, there's a whole several pages dedicated to bat viewing and where to park and what's the best place to be on the bridge and all that stuff. So it's a big deal to view bats there. And then probably the most famous place is Bracken Cave Preserve, and that's in San Antonio, Texas. And it deserves its own introduction. And I'm going to play this short video from Bracken Cave. This cave was bought by Bat Conservation International and with some help with Nature Conservancy in the beginning to protect this bat cave. This is the largest colony of bats known in the world, and it's a maternal colony of Mexican free-tailed bats. So I am going to try to see, we got this to work earlier, to see if I can play this for you. And it's a short 4-minute video on bats of the Bracken.
The first time I was out here, you're speechless. Just to see this wonder of millions and millions of animals in one place. Ooh. Bracken Cave is the home to the largest colony of bats in the world. It's a maternity colony of Mexican free-tailed bats, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 million, here in San Antonio, Texas. As they come out of the cave in the evenings and fill the sky, we call it a batnado. If we get any little gust of wind, it could knock them down into the ground, and they're most vulnerable. The bats have to watch out for predators. When the bats get up to treetop level and they start streaming away, they're mostly relying on safety in numbers, because that's when the hawks will come in trying to grab a bat. The Mexican free-tailed bat is a migratory species of bat that spends the summers in the Texas Hill Country and spends the winters in central to northern Mexico. Bat Conservation International purchased Bracken Cave in 1992. We now have 1,500 acres surrounding the cave to protect it from the development in the area. The cave itself is 650 feet long. It's about 124 feet wide at the floor and about 117 feet floor to ceiling. So this bat comes to these large bat caves to have and raise their young. As they come out of the cave in the evenings, they're heading about 60 miles out to where a lot of our agricultural crops are. This colony is going to eat about 147 tons of bugs every night. So that's a big benefit to our local farmers.
They're about to come.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
When we get a chance to bring someone out here to see bats in their natural place for the first time, people really get the fact that they're important to the ecosystem, and this place is important, and it needs to be protected. It really helps on a scale of explaining to people how important bats are all over the world.
Good. Oh, glad the sound worked on it. So the other piece of information I'd like to leave you with is more information, how you can find out more about bats if you're interested. If you're interested in just bats in your area, there is a Washington Bats local regional organization out of Linwood, Washington, Bats Northwest. And then these are international and national bat advocacy organizations that do bat work and bat research across the world. So I think hopefully, if anything, I've left you with interesting tidbits about bats, maybe things that you didn't know, and maybe appreciation to learn more or see bats for yourself. And with that, I will take any questions. I'm happy to answer anything that I can about bats.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Hey, are there any questions? And Jenny, if you would maybe monitor the Zoom audience and see if there's any questions.
Someone on Zoom wanted to see the house slide again, the bat house slide, if that's possible.
She did too quickly. There are lots of plans online, and on Merlin Tuttle's conservation site or BCI site. Both of those sites have plans too, so you can build your own. We have a combination of ones that we've built and then ones that we've purchased. And we have had intermittent luck with bats. And again, I feel like we had maybe more older years than 15, more than 15 years ago, we used to have more bats use the houses than we do now. But we still do see them and sometimes see them there hibernating. So some bats, and it's not really known what the complete life cycles of all of our bats are in this area. And so some probably do stay here to hibernate and some may migrate to warmer climates. But we have had them hibernate and stay throughout the year in the bat house. And the first year we found out about that is when my husband decided to clean it in the winter. It's like, don't do that. So yeah, it can take a couple of years. It's common for people to say it takes a couple of years for bats to find the house and use it. So don't get discouraged. And if you want to take it down to clean it, shine a flashlight up first.
Okay, there's a question from the Zoom audience. Brad Buff asks, how much danger from rabies
Mm. Yeah, that's a common question. Bats do get rabies just like any other animal. It's actually a fairly small percent, and it's in the 2 to 3 percentile range of bats that have rabies. But having said that, any wild animal, bat included, that is found either injured or even a young and you're not sure about it, we obviously don't recommend picking it up, handling it, touching it. If it is a bat that your husband accidentally knocked out of the bat house in the winter, you can use a towel or gloves to move it to a safer, more secure location. If it doesn't disappear within an hour, then something could be wrong with it, and that you could call a wildlife rescue agency if you have one local to you. We have our wildlife care clinic here. That if you are in contact with a bat, if a person is bitten, then that bat should be captured and taken and examined for rabies, and the person should be treated as if rabid, just because it's fatal, just a fatal disease. It's unlikely and uncommon, but it is a fatal disease. So we treat every bat contact like that very seriously.
Just as a cardiologist, what size of the bats' hearts and what's their what is their heart rate and why do they live so long a lives, you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. They have an amazing heart rate range. So when they're sleeping, they can be in the 20s, 30s beats per minute. When they're flying, they can be pretty tachycardic, really high rates, and depending upon the species, 150 to 250 beats per minute. So they can cruise pretty fast. In hibernation, they're very similar to other hibernating animals where their heartbeats can be 2 beats per minute, can be very, very low. It's a very low metabolic rate and heart rate. Yeah, and what causes them to live so long? That's certainly a $1 million question, and that's one of the reasons that people are interested in studying their longevity, but also their resistance, or at least historical resistance to disease and viruses. They tend to have pretty amazing immune systems, and that's captured the attention of molecular biologists and physicians and cardiologists for a really long time. So I don't know if we know the complete answer to that, but they are very similar to a lot of other seasonal animals that tend to be long-lived.
A couple questions. One person asked about bat guano and whether it's safe to use in a garden.
Commercial bat guano is safe to use. It's generally been prepared in such a way that it is safe. It's rendered safe. Oftentimes they'll either freeze it or irradiate it, or they'll process it in a way. I wouldn't collect it myself and do that. In fact, in bat caves, the ammonia from bat guano can be, in large colonies especially, can be damaging and even fatal to breathe. So it's not something that you want to expose yourself to. And then the fungus aspect. So particularly in the Ohio River Valley and some of the southeast, histoplasmosis and other fungal organisms can be found there. So if it's commercially available and processed, they've usually done a decent job with it. So I don't worry as much about the safety. I worry a little bit more about the processing, like how did they get it, and was it a bat friendly extraction process? Did they disturb a colony? Did they disrupt the environment in the colony? Did they bring in fungi and diseases and things? So I have shied away from it long ago, just for those reasons alone. Is some of the practices in obtaining it aren't really nice on the bats themselves.
Another, Ruth Gifford asks, can you speak more about the studies cited in the presentation about white nose syndrome, pesticide use increase, infant death. I'm interested in cause versus correlation.
Right. I'm happy to send out those publications to the group if they want to post them on the website. If somebody would like to post them so you can read them. The cause correlation thing is really a good one because I looked at that pretty hard, and they do a really nice job of correlating using a direct correlation. So do a really nice job of having direct indices and eliminating confounding factors such as, infant accidents or homicide or other things, climate events in the during that study period, which there were a lot of them. So I've done a really nice job, I think, statistically of looking at all of those things and still coming up with this really strong correlation. So it is rather interesting whether we could say what the factors are, and the supplementary materials of that data. They do look at what some of the bigger environmental toxins are. So what some of the pesticides used, what are some of the toxins. They do a little bit of sampling, what was sampled and where. So they do a bit of digging into that aspect. What are the potential causes of the infant illness that could be related? But I'm happy to share those. I can email them forward.
Thanks, Lynn. We have, there's another question, a couple more questions. And this, Carrie Duvich says, we have a few bats in our garage eaves in the summer. They come out at night and feed on the insects. In the fall, they leave. Do they hibernate somewhere else or migrate?
Good question. They're probably little brown bats, and they probably do migrate, at least to the Midwest or maybe the South West to hibernate. Some bats will remain active for a little while longer if they're in a more warm clime and hibernate for a shorter period. But we don't know a lot about the biology, the complete biology of our bats in our areas. Most bats colony roost for hibernation, and we've not been very good at finding or identifying where those locations may be. So it's thought that many will migrate a bit south. But again, we've had bats in our bat houses over the winter, so some could stay. And depends on the species too. I think the little brown bats tend to move more, or the ones that were in our bat house were the big browns.
Okay, thank you. A new member, Doug Washam, asked about the same question about hibernation and or spending the winter here. So I think you just answered that question. Another question, if a bat takes up residence in, for example, your porch eaves, should you leave it alone? It's okay there, she says parenthetically, or should you try to encourage it to go somewhere else?
I personally would leave it alone. The only thing that might be of concern is if it is making a mess. So if you have several that are over your front door eave or something that you don't want in that location that are making a mess. But if they're in a location that they're not bothering anything and they're using that for their nightly roost, they're good to have around. They're good for your yard, they're good for your garden. I would leave them be.
Okay, thank you. And another question, besides maintaining good habitat, like leaf clutter and decaying wood, is there any bug box type thing that exists to stimulate insect populations?
Well, I think that's a question I may not be able to answer. The best technique I know for stimulating insect populations is to provide insects things to eat. So your garden, for one, your flowers, your attractants for pollinators, right, and not spraying, leaving, that's a great suggestion. Leaving stacked logs or leaf litter and things, bark, things like that, that can be houses and places for insects to be. So creating a more natural environment, a more wildish environment.
So this summer we were out in our boats a lot along the river, and we may have not noticed before, but this past summer we noticed a lot of bats during the day flying around. Um, do you think they were sick, or is that a normal thing we just never noticed before?
Yeah, it's probably a normal thing. You will see bats, particularly say 2 or 3 hours before sunset, and a couple of hours after sunrise, you'll still see bats. And if the insect, whatever swarm population, whatever was going on at that time was pretty good for them, they'll stay out and eat. So especially over water, that's pretty common. That's going to be where insects might congregate or migrate through, or be in a large hatch or community. So that would be a bad attractant.
Thanks.
Another question from our Zoom audience. Do they favor one insect over another?
Depends on the species. But I would say overall, probably no. But some of the bigger bats are going to eat bigger things. Pallid bats are really well known for eating scorpions. That's one of their preferred things to eat in the Southwest. So some bats do have a specific thing that they like. Most of our bats here, I would say, probably aren't that picky. Any flying insect that they can get in their mouth would work.
I have a question. And this probably varies by species, I would imagine, but since they have pups in the spring and then in the fall they go off to hibernate somewhere, how long does it take to wean the pup or emancipate their pups? I mean, are they ready by fall to go off and hibernate?
Yeah, they are. By the summer, by midsummer, then the pups are able to fly on their own, feed on their own, and take care of themselves. I think what is interesting and not really known very well is how well do they stay together. A lot of seasonal animals and animals that are in colony will stay in a family group and migrate in a family group and overlap in a family group. So how much they stay together versus do the young just completely disperse and go off on their own? I don't think we know for sure the answer, but they are able to take care of themselves and fly in the summer and then into the fall. And I'm sure they're following the pack of animals to their hibernation place.
Any other questions? It looks like we might be at the end of our questions. Thank you very much. What a great program.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I hope you find bats interesting, and I hope I spark some interest in maybe watching bats for yourselves.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, nice.